Ladies and gentlemen, here to introduce our special guest today is the Regional Director of the ADLs Washington DC Office, Mr. David Friedman.
Good morning. I think the greatest honor I have as an ADL professional is the opportunity I've been given to work with law enforcement. The partnership between law enforcement and the Anti-Defamation League is such a natural one that I often find that I don't explain why it is that ADL, among all the other non-profit organizations, a civil rights organization, devotes so much of its time and resources to working with law enforcement. And it's really a very simple answer, which is shared values. The ADL exists to protect all people from hate. Law enforcement exists to protect all people. It is one of the great sources of pride that we have been able to expand this partnership to the degree that we have. Having said that, over the course of the last 4 years, we have developed a program which brings senior American law enforcement officials, executives, to the state of Israel to study firsthand suicide bombing, terrorism, the tactics, the lessons learned by the Israel police that hopefully will be able to equip American law enforcement with understanding tactics and strategies that will protect the American people. Over the course of the last 4 years, without question, for many of the law enforcement professionals that we have taken over to Israel, the greatest highlight is not the meetings that they have with high-level law enforcement leaders in Israel. It is the meeting that they have, the conversation with a sergeant major in the Israel police. And that is the woman I'm about to introduce to you. Ronit Tubol, when I first met her 4 years ago, did not speak as confidently as she does, did not walk with as much confidence. And she will tell you why that is. But even though she was only 2 years after a catastrophic event that certainly shook her life and took the lives of 19 others, even at that time, the steely determination, her willpower, her strength resonated throughout the room. And it's a very strange experience when you see 15 to 20 chiefs of police sobbing uncontrollably as they listen to a sergeant talk about an experience that is almost unknown over here, but is almost an everyday experience in the state of Israel. As I introduce Ronit, bear in mind she came in the other day to be honored by the Anti-Defamation League, one of 3 women honored before 2,500 people last night at the Kennedy Center. I've wanted to honor Ronit ever since I first saw her, and I can guarantee one thing, that while we brought her over last night to honor at the Kennedy Center, we intend to keep bringing her over because the lessons she has about what democracies can do to fight back against terror are profound. And there are also things that don't require enormous numbers of people working together, but are the willpower within each of us to deal with the fear and push back the fear that is, after all, the basis of terrorism's ability to intimidate nations, individuals, societies. Without further ado, let me introduce Ronit Tubol.
Thank you all. My name is Ronit Tubol, and I'm 36 years old. I'm married to Shlomo Tubol. He's 37. We live in Jerusalem, Israel. We have 2 children. We have my daughter, she's 7 years old, and my son is 3 years old. We are both policemen. My husband is a captain in the Jerusalem district. He works for the intelligence, and I also work for the intelligence in Jerusalem district. My story begins on 18 of June 2002. A day before 17, information was just roadblocks were put up and the Jerusalem city was closed off. My husband was called to work to do his job because of this information. I remember he phoned me the day before 17th of June and he told me, please don't get out from the house because there is a very serious warning. And so we talked about this because we're both policemen, and so I promised him that I won't get out of the house. The next morning, the next day is his birthday, but anyway, I didn't get out from the house. The next morning, I remember I was very rushing to work, and I took my baby. She was then 9 months. I took her to the kindergarten, and then I went to work. I was very rushing because I had a very important meeting, and so I took the bus number 32, which did his way from Gilo neighborhood, this is the place I live in, to Central City. And one station after me, the bomber got on the bus, and the minute he got on the bus, he blew himself up. Apparently, I stood just behind him, so when he blew himself up, the roof of the bus was divided into two, and I flew from the roof of the bus. And actually, this saved my life. The first ambulance that came to the area took me to Hadassah Hospital, to the ICU, intensive care. I was up 10 minutes after I arrived to the hospital. I have a brain injury. I was operated in my brain. I suffered from a lung injury in my lungs, my ear. In fact, my whole right body was very hard injury. Back to the scene. My husband he arrived to the scene to do his job. He was evacuating wounded without even imagining that his wife was on this bus. And as time was passing and I didn't answer to the cell phone, he started to suspect that I might be on the bus. And also in the scene, the police officers found my police card in the bus, so they understood that I was on the bus, but they had to find me. They couldn't find me. They found a body, headless, and so they decided to compare the fingerprint of the body with my fingerprint. They thought about the worst. They thought I wasn't alive anymore, and they wanted to tell my husband to come to Abu Qabil Center. Abu Qabil Center is the place that bodies are taken to. They wanted to tell him to come to Abu Qabil Center, and in the same minute, his uncle that is working in Hadassah Hospital phoned him and told him that he thinks he saw me and he should arrive immediately to Hadassah to recognize me. So instead of going to Abu Qabil Center, he went to Hadassah, and he saw me. He couldn't recognize me. He couldn't recognize him with his wife because I looked terrible. He asked my jewelry, and then he said, "This is my wife. This is Ronit." And this was after 5 hours. I was anonymous. The doctors operated me without knowing who I am. I was anonymous for 5 hours, and finally he found me. I was 12 days unconscious, and I woke up after 12 days. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move my body, my hands. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. And then started the rehabilitation process. I had treatments of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, everything from the beginning. And today, I'm able to, of course, to walk and even to run. I couldn't believe I would ever run. I'm back to work. I'm doing the same job that I did before for the intelligence in the police, Israel police. I'm raising my 2 children, and it was very mean to me to be here because it's an opportunity to tell you that in Israel, terror is like we're living in terror every day, but we never give up. We never give in to terror.
Thank you for those very moving and inspirational remarks. You know, this memorial contains the names of 18,274 fallen officers throughout U.S. history. Working with the National Conference of Shaman Society, we have determined that at least 26 of these fallen heroes were Jewish. In recognition of those fallen officers and all the men and women of law enforcement who have made the ultimate sacrifice, we will now lay a wreath at the center medallion. May all of these officers rest in peace. That concludes our formal program. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I know that Lynn Lyonston, our Senior Director of Memorial Programs, will now give the Sergeant Major a tour of the memorial grounds, and anyone else who is interested, you're welcome to join the Sergeant Major and Lynn on the tour. Thank you again for coming.